Good evening, and welcome to the Ann Arbor District Library. On behalf of the library, my name is Steve, and we'd like to welcome Katie Hartsock and Russell Brakefield to this space to share some of their poetry with us. To go through a couple of just quick housekeeping tips before going further, to point out two things. First of all, if you are in need of hearing-assisted devices, there are two that are on the back table as you came in. Actually, there's more than two things, I lied. Second of all, we are streaming and recording this broadcast, so if you have questions later on, we do ask that you use the microphone. We'll pass it around so that your question can be recorded for the streaming and then also the recorded audience. You can find this on the AADL channel on YouTube about a day later. Third of all, if you're looking for a bathroom, if you exit this space and then turn right, you'll find a pair of bathrooms on the far wall. And finally, if you're looking for either of their two books, they are on sale from Literati, which you pass on the way in. So just to introduce again, Katie and Russell, they are respectively the authors of Wolf Trees and My Modest Blindness. Katie is a professor of English and creative writing at Oakland University and hails from Youngstown in the state that we try not to mention in this town. Russell is a professor at the University of Denver in the University Writing Program and hails from a state that we do like. He's from the Grand Rapids area. So welcome back to Ann Arbor, and both of them did cross paths through Ann Arbor as graduates of the University of Michigan Helen Zell Writers Program. We are glad to have them at the library, especially Russell, who we welcome back to Ann Arbor from the way of Colorado. And without further ado, Katie and Russell.
Thanks so much, Steve, and thanks to the Ann Arbor District Library for hosting us, and thanks to all of you for coming out on a November evening. It's really lovely to see all your faces. And thank you, Russ, for setting this up with me. I am delighted to be reading with you, and I'm looking forward to talking about our poems afterwards. So I will read from my new book, Wolf Trees, which was out in September. And it has a good bit to do with motherhood, with mythology, and also with my living with type 1 diabetes. So I'll talk more about what a wolf tree is in a minute, but I will read the first poem in the book, which I sometimes call a fast ode to the title, which is Breast Milk. The eyes wide or weighty with it, the full boat or low tide of it, the leopard of it when it leaps. Nervous before a sermon, St. Bernard prayed for help, and the Virgin appeared, babe in lap, to squirt him in the eye with a luscious stream of it, thus gifting him with eloquence. The sun-white glow of it in dimmed-down rooms across galaxies, galaxies, galaxies. The Romans admired a mother who visited her father, sentenced to starve to death in prison, and kept him alive with it, secretly, the leopard of it when it leaps. 10 children my great-grandmother nursed from one breast, the other side never made, maybe, a country doctor thought, because of her childhood polio. The creation ex nihilo of it, across the galaxy's pale cream. In a short story by Maupassant, a train is stopped far from anywhere, and one car holds 2 strangers, a very hungry man and a nursemaid, painfully engorged. And that's all you really need to know, except it occurs to me, she must have been hungry too. And this next poem is an Ann Arbor poem, and it is dedicated, I guess, to the Huron River. During the pandemic, we took a lot of walks as a family, and when we would go down to Barton Pond, there's a bridge there right by the dam, and it had this word written on it in white cursive, sea, S-E-A, which, of course, the Huron River is not the sea, but there was something sort of magical about looking at the river and seeing the word sea across the very Midwestern deciduous landscape. And then someday, during also the pandemic, when it was kind of getting long and everyone was frustrated, someone had come along and X'd that out, and I was very upset. So upset that I wrote a poem about it. And it's called Negative. To whoever crossed out with a blue X the word "C" written in white cursive on the top iron guardrail of my second favorite bridge over the Huron River. Of course it's not. Were you angry? Were you sad? Are you a disgruntled former employee of the earth? You have company. I know some walks can get you nowhere. I've seen one child take away a toy from another, not because they wanted the lamb or train or drum, but they saw the other kid so happy with it. And a no erupts, a need to negate what might be someone's favorite thing. When I first saw what you did, I yelled across the water, startling swans with their bottoms up through air and beaks deep in dioxane-plumed mud back to the surface. Their hearts can't say what's been done to them either. And why did you use such a pastel Marian shade of blue? Why does your ex have that strange sense of elegance, patience, uncannily equal to the word it came to cancel? Almost as if it were you who first wrote "C" in a burst of jubilant heresy, a fit of 21st century Duchampian reverence, a mood where the world could be different, when water itself could be baptized, revised. Then came a day terribly certain that no better difference is coming, a day to recant, not erase your work. A day like today, I feel it too. This next poem is, we can all pretend we're in a bar when we're reading it. It's an ancient drinking vessel inspired this poem. And so the Greeks had these wine jugs they were called kylix, and kylikeis, plural. And they were these wide things that you would hold by the handles. And on the front is a pair of eyes. So they're called an eye cup. But the cool part is that when you would finish drinking, and you would lift it to finish it, it's actually a face at the bottom. And so there's a nose, like the handle, I should say the base of the cup becomes the nose, and then the full mask. So if you've ever thought of becoming someone else during alcohol, it's a very wonderful visual metaphor for like, here's my mask that I put on when I finished. And I guess I love these cups, and so I wrote this poem, kind of like an anonymous persona poem, if we can accept that, as someone who's watching someone drink from this and thinking about them as they lift it up. It's called Eye Cup. An ancient Greek drinking vessel with a face, normally prominent eyes underneath. Draining it, you lift a mask, a satyr, a monster, a brighter-eyed man, painted on the bottom of your kylix. The foot of its stem is the cartoonish nose, and its handles, rounded ears, you finger grip so you can wear your new face. And everyone laughs as you shoulder sway, drink the last few drops, let some dribble down your neck from a head not quite connected. The streak runs red and then pale red. But I know you best in the early sips, when the cup's eyes just cover your mouth. You look at me with 4 ways of looking, and someone else, who's also you, drifts in the lees. So the title sequence is called Wolf Trees, and if anyone doesn't know what a wolf tree is, the whole sequence kind of gives examples of what people across the country and how they use it. So it's got its couple different meanings. One can be a tree that was not cut down when other forests were cleared to make way for farmland. And you might see like a single pasture tree, and so it grows unencumbered. There's no competition, and so its branches just get really wide. And then the other definition is if the farm has failed and the new forest grows up around that tree, then it's kind of this like huge looming tree surrounded by younger trees in a forest. And so people across the country use it in different ways. And it's kind of got an unknown origin, with the only clear thing that in the early 20th century, US forestry pamphlets hated wolf trees. And they were like, cut them down. They are unfit for life. They're too big, and they're very messy and cluttery. They wanted very neat forests, which we've thankfully gotten beyond that valuation. But when I was diagnosed when I was 26 with type 1 diabetes, I I couldn't write about it for a long time, and it was just a really subsuming change in my life. And something about learning about the phrase wolf trees let me start writing about it. And so a lot of these poems, and wolf trees, the sequence especially, deal with diagnosis and thinking about living with diabetes. It is in 11 sections. I'm not going to read 11 sections. I won't read the whole thing. I think I'll just read part 1 and then also part 8. So, wolf trees. I cut down a forest and left one tree. I put to pasture the berry-eyed beasts who could lie with horseflies in its shade. And I spread its acorned branches outward and upward into what would be a telltale shape, a crown without hindrance, a Vitruvian man risen out of the ground at his groin and stretching all of his arms to their fullest circumferences. I changed my mind. Let the farms fail and trees swarm back over the land, a forest again. I watched saplings try to find a way up around the oak, a behemoth over all the new growth, a mouth continuing to drink its accustomed jugs of sun and rain, a gnarled bouquet. I called it a wolf tree. And the sequence alternates between free verse and prose poems, and section 8 is a prose poem, and it ends with a joke from my grandmother. So, section 8. You're a little long in the tooth to be having a baby, my grandmother chuckled at me. Wolf trees don't have teeth anymore. In fact, their gummy, open gullets are more like wombs. The sparrows know something like this, they who built a nest in the growling mouth of the dragon statue down the street, flying freely in and out. She grew up in the Depression and usually does not laugh at her own jokes. Like a wolf tree, her face is the craggiest kind of beautiful. An old diabetic, she'd call herself, with some bitterness. She is not many years away from becoming a snag, a decayed and hollow trunk. All the conservation biologists are now likewise advising, don't cut down. Precisely because they're dead, they shelter life. I don't think she was being mean. I think she likes saying things other people don't, to preserve certain turns of phrase, long in the tooth, or I won't have no truck with so-and-so. I think she was worried. Head nurse of the maternity ward for decades, she once delivered 10 babies in one night. Once, a 15-pound baby. The mother was an old diabetic, she said, laying every ounce of blame on the body she had seen inside. And the baby? Not good to look at. I think for all her worries, she likes the spirit of a good surprise, like her remark once that Sean Connery probably has plenty of good sperm left. Another virtue of the wolf tree, in their old age and breadth, they are prolific seed producers. Or like a watermelon roast. Hearing that I attended a bonfire on a beach with a group of friends, she asked if we had a watermelon roast. What's that? Oh, it's when guys and girls have a fire and someone throws a watermelon in and it explodes and everybody goes into the bushes and has a piece. Grandma. I was really lucky to have for my cover art the 1934 woodcut by James Dexter Havens, which is called Daydream. But James Dexter Havens, and I write about him in the Wolf Tree sequence, was the first American whose life was saved with artificial insulin in 1922. So the cover is like very dear to me because this is one of the first, the first patient in America to have their life saved with insulin, and also he went on to produce such beautiful art that thinks about kind of internal processes of nature, which I think speaks to his status as a diabetic and someone who thinks about what's going on inside them a lot. So I'm really grateful for that. It is November, and there's been a lot of election stuff in the air, and I thought I would read a poem in here for November that chronicles my time after I graduated with my undergrad from Cincinnati back in 2004. I spent that summer canvassing for John Kerry all over Cincinnati. And it was really quite an experience. And the title poem talks about an ancient kind of Greek poem. It's called a paraklausitharon. Yes, that's a word. And it's specifically a kind of poem that is addressed to a door. And it's the door of a house where someone you love lives. And then so if you can't talk to them, you go talk to the door. A paraklausitharon is an old kind of poem addressed to the door of a house you want to get into, where someone you are into lives. Evening sees you return to that door that stays shut, and if it would only open wide enough, your song could change from lament to love. Our campaign was long. The season I canvassed a city and its hinterlands, ostensibly for John Kerry. At the time, it felt dire that nothing could be more important, and I knocked on doors from hefty, moneyed houses that gave me lemonade in clean, tall glasses to the most falling down places. And by no means, we were told, could we ever enter anywhere. About to ring a bell on a dead-end street, I saw through a picture window a naked man asleep on his couch, and on top of him, a crested iguana, the length of a golf club, also sleeping. Sitting together on the cool concrete of her front steps, I wept with an old woman who had just buried her son and finished her story, but yes, I'm voting for Kerry. In a Mill Creek Valley housing project I can't find now on a map, no one on my Palm Pilot's list of registered names came to the door. Everyone said of everyone, they don't live here anymore. Laundry hung from windows to dry in the air that smelled like a leak of something nobody should breathe. Standing in the dirt courtyard, I looked up and could see, high on the highest hill, my university, where I had taken in so many times the almost panoramic view, and I never knew. Once a man who lived on a state street tried to get me inside, behind his door, with him, but that's not how the poem goes. Predicated on separation, stubbornness, and never having, the paraklausitharon, and always ending with another plea. I walked through an America about to vote, and it made me dizzy sometimes, how I could smell some intricate history at each threshold, bread baked, a pet gerbil, a toxic cleaner or clingy cologne, the rubber of a tricycle's handlebars and the plastic of its streamers, an ashtray between two tumblers left behind the night before. I was often sure someone was home who would not come to me for anything. And if you ever have time to go door to door, I highly recommend it. I learned a lot and talked to a lot of people. Okay, so I will read just a couple more poems. The first poem is a little bit of a mother story, and if you ever wondered the best way to cut a mango, there's also some instructions on how to cut a mango in here. So. It's called Appearances and Realities. Like when the rock of the mango finally ripens and I slice off its cheeks, score its flesh, scoop half out to one sun and half to the other, then I carve away chunks from the pit, dividing this second round as I did the first. Then I nibble away whatever's left, and to the boys, it looks like I'm enjoying the biggest, fattest piece, like I'd saved it for myself, and they protest and want some. But really, I'm gnawing a bone. But really, I'm scraping bits with my teeth like a slate-beaked parrot who knows a lot of words she's taught herself not to say. But really, I'm chewing a stone I stepped on long ago, walking into the water of an island's hill-licked bay. I went in wearing summer clothes. I could not go in, staring at my feet on a bed of rocks who were round and bright, with as many colors mercies as any kind of fruit, who were so glad I was there. And I'll end with a poem called glucose tablets. And glucose tablets are something I carry around with me in case I have a low blood sugar. And they're very disgusting, and they do not taste good. And even one of my sons, who is convinced, as per the previous poem, that I'm always hoarding delicious things that I'm not giving to them, they took one of the glucose tablets once. The whole point of them is that they contain you eat 4 of them, and that's enough to lift your low blood sugar back to a safe level. And so if you can't get juice or food otherwise, you have these little gross chalk things that you can eat in an emergency. And one of my sons tasted them, and they're like, no, thank you. So, the way this poem ends, it has my first cousin, Lorene, in it, who's also a type 1 diabetic, so this poem's kind of for her. And it also has an anecdote from my time as a student in the MFA program here. So, glucose tablets. They taste like chalk might, sweetened, slow like thought to crumble, but quick to disappear, absorb. Starting insulin, I started waiting to screw up my body's new mathematics. I remember the first low blood sugar like any first time. The room, the rug, slightly spinning. It was true what Lorene had said, that it would feel like frantic pedaling on a bike with its chains come loose until it was over. Words are terrible whenever I chew glucose tablets, flying in and out like swallows, here and gone from nests, improbably bird spit glued to the top floor eaves of the brutalist-style library where I sat watching them, not writing. A poet visiting campus once told us, writing poems is not so hard. He saw the blackboard's silver tray and said, I'll do it now. He spoke in line breaks of his first grade teacher, the chalk dust smeared over her clothes, the just wet smell, the petrichor of erasers he would clean after class, piercing his boyhood's nostrils like a drug before drugs, the maternal and the sexual, the white cliffs of Dover, far across the sea and in his hands. That's all it is, he said, chewily. You see something and think of something else. Let the remembering begin and end. Thanks.
All right, how we doing? Good. Thanks, Katie. That was amazing. Thank you guys so much for coming out. There's so many things to do, literary things to do in Ann Arbor still. Me and Katie were trying to put this together, and there's a reading every night, so I appreciate you guys being here. I'm going to read from this book called My Modest Blindness, and I think I'll just talk a little bit about it before I read, so that when I start reading, you know why I'm reading so close. So when I was finishing my MFA program here, this is 2010 or 11, I've always had really bad eyes, but I was diagnosed with this condition called keratoconus, which is a degenerative eye disease that basically means my eyes are turning, my corneas are turning into sort of football shapes. I was having trouble seeing, and particularly having trouble with light sensitivity and headaches and things. And so I got this diagnosis, and I didn't really quite understand it at the time. And I could tell in the examining room, the doctor was trying to sort of impress some, like this is a serious thing. And then I remember he said, it must be difficult to hear that you'll be so debilitated so early in life. And then I was like, oh, okay, shit. So this is like a serious thing. Because my eyes have always been bad. I was like, maybe I'm just like not drinking enough water or something. And anyway, so it's a difficult condition because they can't really cure it. They can cure it, but you have to be very far gone, and it has to be a last resort because it's quite invasive. And they can't help it much with corrective lenses. And so I was a little bit at a loss about how to think about that at the time. But I happen to be taking a class with Keith Taylor, who's here tonight, who I owe a lot of thanks to for this book. And he had this project in his classes where he was inviting students to think about I think you were saying a gap in your knowledge, and examine it from a lens of poetics or poetry. And so I started thinking and reading and writing about sight and blindness and loss of sight in poets. And it was really sort of a helpful way for me to understand what I was thinking about it. Keith also took me out, I think, for a beer and was like, "Are you doing okay?" Because I was turning in these sad poems about my eyes. And I only have one poem. One of the poems that I wrote for that project I have, and it's in the book, and I'm going to read it right now, and then I'll read some other stuff. Yeah. I think I turned this in to Keith, so he read it maybe. In the examining room, Doc says progressive but means degenerative. And I think of Homer, wine-black waves like lashes against the bow, Odysseus's terrible tears when the blind bard recounts. Doc, in his white coat, carries storm clouds. My vision is a paper boat drifting slowly out to sea. So I wrote that poem, and I wrote a couple other things, and I talked about some sightless poets, and then I sort of put it away for a while. And in the last 4 or 5 years, my vision, particularly in my left eye, has gotten quite a bit worse, and has impacted my life in different ways. And so I started thinking about how to write about it. And the one person, the thing that I found doing that project was with Keith was this essay by Borges called On Blindness. And I'd read his poems about his sight in different places, but this essay did a few things that I loved. One of them was sort of miraculous, which is that he was just trying to say, like, blindness is not a condition, or loss of sight is not a condition of, not a condition in terms of a medical condition, but it's a condition of living, right? And I just thought that was such a interesting way to think about this, such a poetic poem person way to think about it. And so a few years ago, I started putting some of these notes and thoughts together, and I went back to Borges. And so the book that came out of that, which is this book, sort of deals with my relationship with this, and in some ways my relationship with Borges too. It's kind of one long thing, so I'll just read a little bit of it. I will begin then, says Borges, by referring to my own modest blindness. A bindle unfurls behind him, images rolling off the lectern and down aisles, yellow tiger, gray wolf in winter. The color that shines in poetry, he says, and wraps the yoke of his years in linen. I'm wrapped in linen. My eyes are eyes like an emu's, an ostrich, and more surface always means more surface to damage. Even a feather's fake eye relays virility. Royal blue blinks in the plume, proffers in the iris awaiting fortune. I swim between image and abstraction. What is dark within me illumine, says Milton, long after his darkness floods in. In the trees tonight, magpies pageant glossy tail pins. Eyes turn in the sun, their story held from me by disease and genetics. On the porch, I'm a cracked lens, a static-soaked station, transistor broken. I'm a translator with no second language. What would you carry from a burning house? Lovers, photographs, money, pets. I'm running a survey. I'm taking a poll. I'm turning colors to stone, to water. My notebooks swell with a catalog of delights of the visual world and the moments just before it leaves me. In the kitchen, a crystal catches ultraviolet from the window and casts a band of brilliant blushes on the page. The other thing that happened a few years ago, One of the things I've been thinking about is like, well, what happens when I can't collect these images that become my poems later? I mean, I think there's some poets in the audience, and like it always starts with some weird bird or some weird stone or some, and so I just started in a sort of act of desperation writing down all of the sort of interesting, weird, beautiful images. And so for like a few years, I was just sort of collecting these things. As I say, sort of things that I thought might be leaving me. I think the upside of it is it sort of changed radically my writing process, and that I was just like looking deeply all the time. And so in the book, what I have here is just a sort of selection of some of these images, and I'm calling them entries here. And now I have stacks and stacks of notebooks of these entries, but there's a handful of them that made them into the book. Entry number 7. In the garden, a trio of purple heirloom tomatoes, their crowns ringed in neon green. A streak of dew hangs on each of their foreheads like sweat. The fine hair of their stems stands tall, pulsing with electricity of water, air, soil. A tag in the dirt tells me the varietal is indigo apple, though all year I've been calling them bruises or savory plums or skyline just before nightfall. It begins for me as almost nothing, just a slow weeping at the edges of frame. In the examining room, a barn burns inside the viewfinder. I only have eyes for you on Muzak, cruel irony of fluorescent lighting. Doc says, open wide, press your palate to the plastic. Topo maps come back scratched with wobbly crop circles. Miloš says to be a poet, you must behold a map both distant and concrete. When I squint, the world trickles back to me. Try not to squint, says Doc, and uses his hand to describe the cornea bending to a bony crescent moon. Entry number 12. Bright yellow lemons in a bowl on my mother's table, steam on the cupboards and her pearl blue eyes, the kitchen's curtains perfect hand stitch. Slacked, the cornea slips to a new shape, parenthetical genetic misstep, and I'm spirited away behind a wall of water. Streetlights wander drunk at midnight. One eye almost always swerves before the other, they tell me. And so goes the right side, my dominant hand missing a shake, my leading shoulder baffled by door frames, by her embrace. What a simple pleasure to always know where you are in relation to the other objects in the world. Where's the edge of the lake, and where the edge of the body? Who's to say the fires burning in the fields aren't just delicate pink lanterns riding on the wind? Faces are the toughest for me right now, especially at like a short distance. And especially on campus, the one that gets me the most is like students, and they'll wave to me and I'll think it's someone I know better, and I'll wave sort of emphatically, and suddenly I'm in a conversation with a student I had like 5 years ago that I don't know that well, and I'm trying to figure out who they are. This is sort of about that. Then seeing and vision are two rivers broke apart. Some faces I can see when far away and when close up, folds behind the eyes holding tight the facade. Borges, thank God for slow nightfall. But in the park today, I flail my arms like a frightened bird, a crane, a heron. I beck at a copse of spindly box elder trees. In the shade below is a face I know that is suddenly a face I've never seen before. Entry 19. A white boat sliding back and forth across the deepest lake I know, like in the Gilbert poem. It carries part of me away each day. I watch myself disappear through a grove of aspens, bark wrapped like reams of paper, the future scratched in their trunks in dirty cursive, an already unintelligible script. This book's sort of broken down in parts. There's sort of some diagnosis stuff, some pathology stuff here. And then in the middle, there's a section that's sort of about the history of corrective technology. One of the things I think the great things about poetry, but also just this project, I was just trying to think about vision in all of the different ways possible. And so it allowed me to do, I'm always coming home to Aubrey and being like, did you know that ducks sleep with half of their brain? Or did you know, and she gets highly annoyed, but a lot of that I think ended up in the book in fun ways. The first lens was born for language. By a bead of convex glass, Catullus reads Petrarch. By a bead of convex glass, Catullus lets Homer swim laps and invents the avant-garde. Below my own loop today, I open to a sonnet, that whirring square machine, and thank the old masters for the way this simple box tells me, no matter the blur, how to read, where to turn. How about form for refuge? How about pattern, meter, line? How about repetition? How about a boat passing back and forth on the same lake each day? A boat that looks to me like a tight quatrain pulled through the current by a nearly invisible string. Doc says there are options, taps his pen, but only when things get really bad, and the body, like a poem, becomes elusive, turns fluid. Hard contacts, he says, a gel in test trials. Worst case is a dead man's eyes swapped for mine on the table. I'm picturing Clockwork Orange, Cyclops, LeVar Burton. I'm picturing a life of seeing through a stranger's lens. Poetry lifts the veil from the hidden beauty of the world, said Shelley, but did not mean it in terms of invasive surgery. I've been Googling the word augment, taking podcasts like Probiotics, one on prosthetics, one on robotics. An oral history of the first corrective lens tells me frames were built first of teeth and fur and animal bone. Even then, making someone whole meant making them less human. I'll read this one because it's an Ann Arbor poem. Ann Arbor bus poem, another place where me and Keith used to hang out sometimes. Reading labyrinths on the night bus by the intermittent desk lamp of stop-requested signs. My eyes wear felt, sing like spades in a midnight garden. I heard once when the first lamps were lit, people cowered in the streets. Shame suddenly a living thing, the devil given extra legs. I know my own hellhounds, even here in the shadows. At my stop, nothing but a denim sky, the lamp I left burning in the window, guilt, regret, and the crunch of snow like rodents chewing dusk beneath my feet. I'll read a few more of these. I will also a big thanks to Aaron Birch and Matt Kirkpatrick, who are also here tonight. I gave them some of these poems. I've been taking notes and thinking about this for a long time. And then we have a writing group together, and I didn't have something one week. And I was like, I gave them a few pages of this. And I was like, is this something? And they're like, yes, this is cool. And so I appreciate you guys for giving me a push to make this book happen. Borges found the death of one sense an open door to others. I have lost the visible world to reclaim another. I walked the lake today, snubbing the molted shoreline opposite me, furry ripple by the dock, indistinct cormorant, shrouded, insignificant feathers, a stubborn word cloud nags the back of my neck, asks for the details I cannot reach. But I suppose all writing is an attempt to capture a precise image with an imprecise instrument. And what is living but trying to find a seabird inside a seabird-colored storm? And then in the yard, 2 fat sparrows, or 2 lithe wrens, or 2 gloves left out and pummeled by rain, or 2 severed hands, fingers still moving to count syllables, counting syllables on the severed fingers of the severed hand left out in the garden, or none of that. Just a foxglove on the fence line, opening its palm, fanning its battered petals. On my 35th birthday, I roam alone the field of my body. I part tall lupines and dew-soaked verbena. I fall into the guts of a fog-soaked valley, count a rosary of polished stones. Beneath the river, it took a pandemic for me to see I'm not alone inside my afflictions. Even here, just river and cloud and single magpie bruising the lodgepole. We're all looking for a clear window, all hunting a still pool. All day, all night, the body intervenes, says Wolf. The creatures within can only gaze through the pain. The body lacks plot, she says elsewhere, but here is a story of the body. I do not walk into the river. I do not slip beneath the moving water. I do not let the current drag me under. Entry 78. On the trail, a row of common mullein dotted with golden pollen. The stalks wave in unison like lit candles, like a row of faint flames. The poem emerges on the page the same as a street sign or a high-hanging menu at a lunch counter, closed captioning in the theater, which is to say, given to me by someone else, which is to say, there is immense pleasure in an idea falling into focus slowly, bit by bit. Think of searching the walls of a dark room for a switch, but think too of feeling that switch suddenly beneath your fingers and the wash of light after, and the room illuminated, making something new out of darkness, something alive and singular. How it is as you imagined and also not, and what beauty and truth alight in that moment. A writer, Borges says, must believe whatever happens to him is an instrument. Everything has been given for an end. Blindness is not a misfortune, Borges says, right before the lecture ends. It is one more instrument among many. And so I take up my pen, or some new instrument even, let there always be something new, and begin again to play. Thanks. And I think me and Katie will take some questions if you guys have them.
If you do have a question, please do go ahead and raise your hand, and I'll be happy to bring the mic to you.
Also,
Yeah.
I know how these things go, so don't feel obligated to ask
Right.
questions.
Yeah.
But if anyone wants to chat, we can.
Yeah, and I could even start things off a little bit because I wish I could go back in time and add one of your lines to my epigraphs for the book, which is even then, to make something more whole, you have to make it less human. And I was like kind of dazzled by that idea, and I dazzled by so many of your lines. Like, thank you so much. But yeah, I mean, Russ and I like just happened to meet by coincidence, and it's kind of fascinating that we both were faced with serious diagnoses in our late 20s and like how that's changed our poetry. And I was just, I mean, your poetry meditates so much on sight and vision and what is poetic sight and what is actual vision. And yeah, I guess, I mean, when you go to Borges, like blindness is not a misfortune, have you felt in some odd way that it's been, if not a benefit to the poetry, but like you were saying, like one more instrument to play with?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, and I also feel very fortunate. Like this is like a diagnosis that was scary, but then has progressed relatively slowly, and I can still live my life relatively normally. But I think, thinking about Borges has been helpful in that way of thinking about just another aspect of my life, right? It's, again, a condition of living. And I was surprised at the way in which it changed my thinking about image and particularly abstraction. I've always been interested in sort of abstraction in poems, but I don't think I was ever particularly good at doing that. I think I was, and so I think one of the things that sort of crept in is just like when I go out in the late evening, things look weird now, and like how do I think about introducing that in a way that other people might see, but also how might it infuse my work with like a different energy than I might have had, and how can I like accept and be excited by that energy? I think that's the sort of spirit, at least, that Borges has, you know? I also, though, like, it just helped me learn a lot about disability studies and about, you know, what those things mean, like both from a teaching standpoint, from a writing standpoint. That's been huge too for me, is just like being open and being hungry for knowledge, right? That thing you said about like vision, equating vision and vision. You know, now I'm always seeing how people sort of mistakenly talk about short-sightedness or lack of vision as a metaphor, you know? And I'm playing with that in the book, of course, too. But I mean, all of these things I had not thought about, I think. I was able to explore, I think. And so that's definitely a benefit, if we could call it that, yeah. I mean, I might ask the same of you, though, if we're gonna, you know, how, and I think we can talk about the language of the poems. How does it specifically impact the writing process or your poems, whether it be that diagnosis or just like life stuff in general?
I think well, first of all, your answer made me think, do you know the poem by Liesl Mueller, Monet Refuses the Operation?
No.
That's a really good one. I would recommend it to anyone. And it's about the French painter also had loss of sight. And there was at a time a surgery offered to him and he said no. And it's interesting how like to think of his paintings and the like kind of blurry beauty of that. It's really great. He later did get it and then kind of regret anyway. But Liesl Mueller writes it in his voice. It's terrific. And I teach it in my disability studies and literature class as a way of understanding actually this thing that most people think of as a deficit, like gives me something, which is of course not across the board true for all disabilities, but I think a lot of artists have come to think of it that way. And I think when I was first diagnosed with diabetes, it really was just overwhelming because I had to focus on numbers, and I think about numbers and what my blood is doing inside and how it makes me foggy thinking or cranky or in a hurry to get home and drink some orange juice. Like it really did just like change things so much. But once I got accustomed to it, I think I looked at the world thinking about internal processes more and like what's going on below the surface, because learning about how to take insulin, how to measure insulin and take the right amount per meal made me think about interiority, like physically, like what's my blood doing and like what do I need to give it what my pancreas would otherwise give it if it could. And so yeah, it was just, I think that brought me into like a different poetic appreciation of like what's going on below the river, what's going on, you know, inside the trees with like, you know, photosynthesis, like just like kind of things like that are processes that we can't see. And even if they're not coming up in the poems directly often, like I think that gave me a kind of different way of understanding or thinking about my surroundings. Yeah. And sugar. A lot of sugar jokes, I think.
Katie, I wondered if you might talk a little bit more about, I'm interested in the connection to the wolf tree and being, and how that, I don't want to say allowed you, but was like a way into writing about diabetes or your experience. If you could talk a little bit about that. I'm just curious about it.
Yeah, yes.
I didn't know what a wolf tree was either, so thanks for that.
Yeah, and I didn't know what a wolf tree was either, and we were out on a walk one day with my family, and my father-in-law pointed to like one of these big trees I think I'd all my life been kind of drawn to because they're solitary and huge and sprawling, and he said, that's a wolf tree, and I said, what? Like I never heard that. And as I learned more about what they were, it seemed like they were a remnant of a former ecology. Like it was kind of a glimpse of like the tree from another time, like whether it was like, you know, when the rest of the trees were cut down to make the way for the farm, or like this new forest grown up around it. And so that idea of remnants and the idea that I live with a disease that 100 years ago would have just been a death sentence, you know, just that would have been it. And so like there's this idea of, well, survival and kind of ruggedness in that, because the wolf trees can be beautiful, but they can also, with their age, have this like cragginess to them and like knots and stuff, and they're not like a smooth, pretty tree. They kind of got like a rough texture to them. So something about like the roughness and the survival and the remnant finally kind of like paved the way. Like as I wrote about wolf trees, I started writing about the diabetes. Yeah. Thanks, Matt.
Hello. As poets, what do you hope to become clear to your readers as you write? Like, so what do you hope to communicate with these two books? What's the I don't want to say message, but what are you trying to tell your readers?
You give me the hard one. It's a really good question. Thank you. I don't know that I set out to communicate anything in the writing of those poems, but it's a good question, because if I'm putting together a book, I certainly should be communicating something, right? I think in this book, it was all about, for me, searching through the relationships between my sense of self and my experiences seeing the world, and sort of broadcasting on the page that searching experience, right? So maybe not a message, but trying to embody or allow readers to experience that sense of trying to understand themselves through these different lenses, which at times were these images that I was pulling from, at times was my conversation with Borges or Milton or other people, and at times was just my own experiences.
Yeah, that I want people to know how to cut a mango. I see. It's a great question, and I think it's a question that all the writers in the room have. You know, especially on days when it feels like, why are we doing this? You know, like why are we sitting down, and why do we keep writing? Like, what are we up to? And which I've been there, you know, and like, why do I keep at it? And I think it's partly, you know, the world, I feel, tries to desensitize us and dehumanize and numb us in so many ways to the beauties around us, the possibilities around us. And I think I'm adding on to a lot of what you said, Russ, like the self and experience, but also kind of taking away those layers of being accustomed or becoming used to, and trying to like confront things as they are and find a kind of beauty and energy in that. Like I want things to feel felt, I guess. And I feel like a lot of things in the world conspire to help us to stop feeling. And I think poetry helps us keep feeling things that are felt and should be felt. And yeah, like as some of you know in here, I love how form can help us do that. So I also think that like form gives us. Like, I loved your line when you had been talking about how about, and then you said, how about repetition? I was like, yes. Like, that does a lot. I mean, it really does, because it puts us in a speed that we don't think at or see at. Yeah. So, but thank you. Yeah.
Well, I think we would be happy to chat more outside. We do have books for sale if you want to come say hi to us. I wanted to make sure to say thanks to Steve and thanks to Al, right, in the booth. And thanks, Katie. This is amazing.
Thanks, Russ. Thank you, everyone, for coming. And thanks, Ann Arbor District Library, too. And I really love my new glass. So.
Thank you.